Hello everyone and welcome back to my top 500 games. We are continuing on from number 439 and this is Galactic the Xmas edition or Xmas Remix 95 or just Galactic or whatever. This is an Amiga game and I'm going to have to describe this because the concept is just so odd. You play as a Santa called Rudolph the Santa, and you travel through space with your airwalking powers between this in this fantasy land between these two multicolored bars, and you defeat enemies by shooting playing cards at them, and it's really strange. Like I don't know how else I can describe this game. Just you walk around in space as Santa, Rudolph, who's a Santa, shooting cards at enemies and having them turn to things, and you collect the things they turn into. It's kind of like another one of those like shooter games, like top-down shooters, apart from you're not looking down at someone shooting, you're looking sideways on in space at this Santa Claus shooting playing cards at things like flying. There's no other way for me to really describe it. It's kind of like one of those twin stick shooter style games, apart from wacky, I suppose. What also really caught me off guard when looking at video footage of this game is that it swears. I mean, I wouldn't have noticed when I was younger, but yeah, it does. Number 438 is Lotus Turbocharged 2, another Amiga game. It's a bog standard racing game. There's not really much I can say. The main thing I remember is that you've just got this series of levels that seem to happen one after the other. And I remember there was one level which was called like the Marsh, and there was one level which was like a city at night, and that sticks in my mind for some reason, the night city level with the tunnels that you go through. I like that, I think. At least I like it in concept. And I remember there was a level where you're playing on a motorway, so it's a lot wider, but if you're on the wrong side, there's cars heading in the opposite direction, and so you don't want to face up against them head on. But aside from that, standard racing game on the Amiga. Number 437 is Dithel's Wonderland, yet another Amiga game. I actually had to look up the name of this game because this is a game that I remember playing, I remember having, but I didn't actually know what it was called. So a while ago I had to go on one of those Amiga forums and type up the descriptions saying it's a game where you play as someone that looks a bit like a Mario character, and it's a platform game, but you've got to jump on these tiles that light them up. And this is me basically describing the game to you. You start off, you're thrown into the level, and you've got these enemies that walk back and forth. Basically, you've got to stand on all of the blank light platforms so that you can light them up, and once you've done all that, you'll complete the level. But I think the thing that I liked about this game at the time was that there's a level editor. You can actually make your own levels. I think this may have been the first game I played with a level editor. I'm not sure. But not that it really has much going for it in terms of level editing, because for one, if I remember correctly, you always start plummeting from the sky in the center of the screen, so you can't really set up a level from left to right, and you can't create walls. All you can do is create a series of platforms. Of course, being as young as I was, I obviously made a level where it's just full of lights and there's no enemies to be seen. I obviously made levels like that. Number 436 is Fez. Now, given all the controversy that went on behind Phil Fish and the design of this game and everything, I actually went into this game expecting to absolutely hate it. Honestly, I thought this is exactly the type of person who would make a game that I would hate. To be honest, I didn't hate it. It was okay at best, I suppose. I think people give the mechanics a bit too much credit. I don't think the whole switching thing is really all that great, to be completely honest. If you don't know, basically everything is on a 2D plane, but you can sort of like flip the view, so the perspective lines things up. If you see the footage, you can see what I'm talking about here. But aside from that, it seemed that that's all it really had going for it. Like aside from that, and I know that there's this whole big secret behind the whole game. Like there's this hidden message in all these like patterns and stuff. But the pure raw gameplay, it seemed like it was something that could be done in a very short amount of time, very quickly, and it would be like a neat little gimmick, and it would end there. I don't see how you can make something amazing out of this. You would have to actually add something. I think that you'd have to actually add something to the mechanics or to the rotating system to make it more interesting. Like you might have a particular type of floor where if you stood on it, then at those times you can't flip the world. Hey, maybe these things exist, you know. I didn't complete the game, but maybe these things do exist in the game, but I guess I wasn't into it enough to get to that point, so I'm just having to base this off what I found in the game. Number 435 is Pac-Man Championship Edition, which is kind of this alternate version of Pac-Man, which, I mean, I don't know, it's weird. It's kind of like you've got this big map, like this big Pac-Man level, but individual parts of the level unlock at once. So it's not like Pac-Man where you've got this maze where you've got to find the best routes and work on the AI of the enemies. It's kind of just do things fast enough and then like time it so that you can wipe out the ghost and get a combo. And I think there was a whole thing going on with bombs as well, where you could like trigger off bombs. But it seemed to have limited appeal to me. Number 434 is, now I don't know how you pronounce this, so I'm just going to say it how I would say it, and that's Machinarium. It's one of those type of point-and-click adventure style games where you play as a little robot and you have to go about, and there's no like dialogue. There's like other robots that will say, like they'll have like a speech bubble with like a picture. You've got to like work out how to get them that item and stuff. You would have specific challenges to do based on the different areas, and I remember you would have different segments whereby they would sort of bring up more traditional games. Like there was this character who, like, you'd go into a bar and you'd play this game with him. I don't know what the game is called. You know, like noughts and crosses or tic-tac-toe, whatever you would call it, but it's on a much bigger board and you've got to get 5 in a row rather than just 3 or something like that. I remember there was one of those, and you'd also at one point towards the end you'd have like this computer where you had to play games within that to progress further. I quite like those. There's some parts that I didn't quite like so much. I think sometimes these things can be a bit unintuitive and it could be harder to work these things out. I remember there was a part where there was like a band and you had to get them their instruments or something like that, and there was a part where you had to get the clock working, or there was something to do with the clock. I'm not fully confident in all my memories, but I do have memories of like specific screens in my head of this game. Number 433 is Icy Gifts 2. This is a flash game that I don't remember if it was on More Fun Zone. I think it was on Congregate though, and it was a strange. They called it a chain reaction game. So you have this area of effect where you click on the screen, and then if things fall inside that area of effect, their abilities would trigger. So you'll have like all these bubbles flying around with different abilities. Like you might have one with electricity and it will zap out and it will grab more stuff. Or you can get like an exploding one and it would explode. And the idea is you have to clear them in order to get the points to complete the game. But I remember what I actually didn't like so much about this game was that there was some sort of like shop system which I felt kind of was a bit too overwhelming and a bit too powerful. It did have a leveling system which I did like, so you could go through the stages, and if there was some that were really hard, then you could get some of them done to get some of the points, and then sort of spend your experience leveling up some of the powers, because you used to like level up the different powers. I say used to as if the game doesn't exist anymore. No, that's what you do in the game. You level up different individual like powers, such as the lightning one, so it'll zap more, or the explosion one will have a wider range of effect and that sort of stuff. But I remember there was something to do with like a shop or something extra, which to me seemed a bit overwhelming and seemed to downplay the whole leveling system, which was my only real downside to that game. Number 432 is Wiz and Liz, which I had on the Amiga. I've also played the Mega Drive version, and this is like a crazy platform game. You can play as Wiz or Liz. There's really no difference between the two, just a different sprite. And you've sort of got this hub world with like all these doors, and you jump into them, and then each one has their own individual level. And within each level, you have to run around and jump collecting animals, and then like things turn into letters, and you got to jump around and collect the letters. And all the levels were forever repeated, and they were really fast, and you could jump. I wouldn't say you could jump really high, but you could jump at relatively high speed, considering the fact that you could run really fast. And you basically just ran all over the place and jumped all over the place collecting these letters, and you could collect fruit which you could put into like the pot, because Wiz and Liz are basically like a wizard and a witch, and you could put them into this pot and they could make things. They could make like power-ups and stuff, but sometimes you could put things together and they didn't really do anything. And it was always like fruit, like you could get like bananas and stuff like that, and they had like these weird happy faces on. But the main thing that sticks out in my mind about this game is the infinite looping levels, where the levels just repeat themselves, and just how fast you could go through them. It's a very hard type of game to describe, because really it has the bare basics of what would be a platform game, but it's not necessarily something that you would call a platform game, because it doesn't have those natural progress start to finish type levels. It's what you might call a collect-em-up, I don't know, but it's something that you could expect existing in sort of like an arcade machine because of its style. But yeah, that's that. Number 431 is Frogger Returns. A very simple game. It's basically Frogger. If you know Frogger, you know Frogger Returns. No, well, I said that the wrong way around. If you know Frogger Returns, then if you know Frogger, then you basically can get the idea in your head of what the concept is. It's Frogger, but like you usually get with these updated, newer versions, it's basically more levels and different paths. There's quite a few different levels, and each one comes with its own individual hazards. There's really not much to describe beyond that. Also, I should point out that in this game, at least for the PS3 version of the game, I believe this is the game with the fewest PSN trophies of all games that have them, because it had like 4 trophies total, which is so small, because it was like 3 golds and a silver or something like that, one for each level. Really does stick out. Number 430 is Pod, another Amiga game, having quite a few Amiga games around this time. Pod is a basic sort of shoot 'em up. You play as this little circle-y thing, which is supposed meant to be the pod, and you hold down the fire button to continuously shoot upwards. And you've got all these enemies that come in from the sides and from above and sometimes from below. You've basically got like a list of different enemies, and they all have like a few weird frames of animation, and they all work differently. Some of them like shoot in from the left to the right, some of them slowly crawl up from the bottom up, and some of them sort of like drop down from the top and then shoot back up, or they'll like zigzag in and out. And then you'll have ones that shoot and ones that don't shoot, and some that are invincible. But it was basically like a point game, so the idea wasn't to defeat all of the enemies, it was to survive each round. So you had the first round, you had the first bunch of enemies come across, and you had to get as many points as possible. And then once you had done so much of that round, once so much time had passed, it would just put you on to the next round. And you basically scored points by surviving and shooting things. So it was one of those old games where it was more about the points than just getting through. Because I remember there were some enemies, like there's one level where all the enemies are just falling from the roof directly down. So if your goal was just to survive, you would just stay in one spot and shoot directly upwards and not move, because if you didn't move, then nothing could kill you. But of course, if you want the points, you have to move left and right. But the thing that does stick out to me a lot about this game, and the big memory I have about this game, aside from the fact that, like, the theme where it looks like it's in space but you're on this really weird grid, like this wireframe grid, so to speak, the one thing that really stuck out to me when I was younger playing this game is the sound effect that plays when you die. If you get hit, your pod explodes, and it sort of, like, the explosion sort of damages the grid, and it doesn't, like, affect the level at all. Like, you can still move around freely, but it sort of, like, visually affects the grid. But also, when you die, there was this laughing sound, like a ha 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 ha, but it had, like, a really strange sort of effect where it seemed like it was an audience, so it felt like it might have been like a game show or something. I don't know. That was something that really stuck in my head when I was younger playing this game. Just that laughing sound effect when you got shot and when you died. I don't know. It's one of those strange things that stick into your head. Number 429 is Time Crisis. Time Crisis was a light gun game that was in arcades, but I had it on the PS1, and I actually didn't have a light gun that worked on the PS1, so I had to use a controller. But that was I was fine with that. I still would have preferred to have a light gun that worked, but I didn't. It's basically one of those games where, you know, you go through a series of, like, an on-rails shooter, as you'd call it, where you got to, like, shoot the screen to, like, hit the enemies, and then you got to, like, duck to reload and hide behind cover, and you also have, like, a set number of lives and all that. I remember there were two modes. There was, like, the original mode and then, like, an extra mode, and I didn't really get into the extra mode so much, but I don't remember it as much. I remember it was sort of like outside this building. That's all I really remember about that mode, and I think you have to go through the building. But I remember the original mode, the different stages that you go through, and I remember that if you shot outside of the screen, then you got, like, extra lives before, if you did that before the game started. And I have, like, memories in my mind of, like, the different bosses. Like the first boss, you got to this room and there were these three guys with claws, and then the boss for the second level was, like, the main villain of the game, because you sort of, like, went through his fortress, and then the third boss, like, his right-hand man who took over. I remember the music for the final boss, which at the time I remember, like, it stuck in my mind and I like that music, but listening back to it now, it's not that good really. So yeah, there's that, and that is going to be it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time where we continue on from number 428. Goodbye.